Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the bridge. We have a special guest for us today, Bruce Brummond. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you.
Well, wait, I have to tell everyone that we are on season 5, episode 5. And Sandy, have you got a quote for us?
Well, I thought I would redo that quote that we talked about earlier with Michael J. Fox because it really does relate to what our conversation is.
Okay.
It says acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It means understanding that something is what it is and there's got to be a way through. And that's by Michael J. Fox.
Okay, great. Well, Bruce, we've had you here as a guest before, but today you're with us, our special series of grief and loss. And we just want you to share your journey with us and tell us, I know you know the stage as well. You've got some materials you've built on your own around the grieving process and your personal experiences. But we're glad to have you here and share your journey with us. So why don't we just give you the floor and you can start telling us about your wonderful wife.
Well, thank you. First of all, thanks for inviting me to be with you again. And as you mentioned, yes, I have. I have developed an online, I call it an online experience dealing with grief. It's called Coping with Heartache. And I've lost my wife 2.5 years ago after 50 years of marriage. She almost had me trained and then she gave up. And, but I feel privileged because I had 50 years. I consider myself a winner, a big winner. I should have a great big W on my forehead, not standing for widower, but standing for winner.
That's a good one, yeah.
Because I'm happy that we had 50 years together of a happy life in so many ways. And she is very, very supportive of my activities. And I've had a lot of activities, as you know, Sue, very well.
You're a busy guy.
Yeah, and I continue to be busy, but that's okay. Anyway, the grief process. If somebody says they're an expert in grief, I would say dream on, person, because I don't know how to be an expert in grief. I am an expert in experiencing grief. I've experienced a lot of grief, but there's not an answer. I'll say that again. There isn't an answer of how to get over the grief process. We just have to learn to endure it. And that's what I've tried to do for 2.5 years. And there's some ways that I've tried to do that, and sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not, and it doesn't get easier. You just learn to live through the pain, and Sandy talked about the word acceptance. I just have the word accept in an acronym. All circumstances can eventually produce triumphs. In other words,
I like that.
We have to learn to accept things, and then we have to learn the beauties of those things we accept. Right now, behind me is a dog that would not be here. Hello, Jack. Jack. This is one of my puppies laying behind me here. His name is Admiral Life Jacket. The other one is here on the floor someplace, probably. I have 2 puppies I wouldn't have if Marianne was still here. I've changed some other things in my life that she was not in agreement with. And I don't know, I know this sounds cruel, but if she were to walk in this room today and say, give up your dogs, give up the other stuff in your life that you are able to do, and you can have me back, I would go, let's negotiate that one. and so my point is this. I think we learn to endure grief. I think we learn to change, to try, hopefully try to make ourselves happy. Then in addition to that, I'm a lot older than you might think. I'll just tell you, I'm 82 years old. Wow. And so I'm facing my own mortality. Yeah. And so in addition to losing my wife, 3 of my 4 closest friends, my brother, my 2 brothers-in-law, of course, my parents have been gone a long time, as most people my age, and I've experienced grief in a lot of ways, but losing a spouse, if you think grief is tough in other ways, lose your life partner and see how that affects you.
Right.
Just try to live through it. One of the smartest things that anybody has said to me about this that is not in my course that I developed that's on my website, when I was going through the process of having Marianne cremated, which we had decided a long time before she got sick, uh, a lady looked at me at the mortuary and she said, "Do you know who you are now?" And I'm going, "Who am I?" She says, you fit the absolute model of a person who won't live very much longer because you'll commit suicide." Do you know what I said to her? "Thank you for saying that." In other words, you have to get ready for times of depression that are just beyond belief. And if that depression lasts for the experts say if that lasts for 2 weeks, you better get help. But we have to find joys, is what I'm saying. We have to keep. I call it distractions. You know, I am purposefully attempting to distract myself by doing other things, by being mentally engaged, by being physically engaged as much as I can. I was in the gym this morning for over an hour, as I am for almost daily. That's the best distraction I can find. I try to wear myself out, and I have to be distracted. It has been 2.5 years, but I'm still dealing with that. But I'd be dealing with other things even if she was here. So I just can't blame it on her.
Hey,
So
Bruce,
yeah, I make
I
it
wanted to ask you, so the stages of grieving, and we know that they are not linear, that we go off, that a person deals with the grieving at different points, different times, different ways. And the stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Did you go through all those stages?
I've listed all those stages on my website in the course that I developed. I I went through 19 separate grief sessions with. I'm a churchgoer and involved with churches, and so I've been through those things. And I mean, to say that this that today it's this one or this moment it's this one. We just have to be prepared to be on an ocean wave of emotions because that's it. We are up and down emotionally, and we just have to be prepared for that. And we have to watch what we say to people. We have to watch what our responses are to people because we aren't the same. I call it floundering over grief. We're in a fog. Floundering over grief spells fog. And so our mind just isn't very clear anymore. And it's hard. It's really hard just to focus because there's always something, whether it's denial or acceptance or bargaining or whatever it might be. I mean, I understand the 5 steps, and I think those 5 steps are really good to study to realize that we humans operate on emotions. It's just that simple. How do we feel? And the real tough part is what I'm experiencing now, obviously, is that the two of you are married and you fell in love with a man and you married him. And that that mystery is just driving me crazy now. I go back and look at that of when I met Marianne and our relationship, and then we were finally married and those kinds of things. And I value that so much more now because I realize how precious that was. And love is a very, very precious thing, and it's a very mysterious thing. And that's what I really think about now is that, of course, at my age, I'm not planning on another relationship. I'm just trying to survive at this stage of my life. Survive, financially in the house we've lived in for 50 years, and still trying to remain active with some things, and I still go to church at least once a week, a lot of times more than that, depending upon the activities. And I'm involved in all kinds of things, and but it's a long, hard process. You just have to be prepared for that tsunami to hit you, because it hits you. and it I mean, my wife went to WSU, and every time I see that logo or that name or a picture of her or whatever, I just melt inside, and that's the way it is. Well, that's a good
Well,
thing.
I liked what you said about you have, I'm going to say, kind of created the habit of being distracted and having things that do a good job of distracting you. Can you tell me a little bit about how you, I mean, because that isn't something that you wake up in the morning and can do automatically. You've set something in motion to make that a habit. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
That's a really good question. As an example, I just a week ago last Sunday was my graduation. Now, neither one of you know about this, but it was my graduation from college, a postgraduate degree, a week ago last Sunday. In other words, I worked towards that postgraduate degree for several years, and I finally accomplished that to keep my mind busy. What I am doing right now is I have published 4 books, 21 narrated online training programs, and I have an outline for course number 22. And so my mind is distracted just trying to help other people. That's what I do. I'm not saying everybody has to do that, but that's what I do. I'm trying to help other people, plus make myself better in the process. And as a matter of fact, I just sent an email to my church. Yeah, I'll be there next week to volunteer for that event. That's what we
So
have
you
to
put
do.
yourself out there and kind of proactively make a list of, I mean, do stuff that makes you have lists of things to do.
Isolation's the killer.
I would say
It's way too easy to be
Bruce, I would say
isolated.
that you've gone beyond just surviving, though. I would say that you're thriving because of the choices that you're making. And one of the best things of healing process is putting yourself out there for other people and thinking of others, because then it's not just about you. It's about how you can make a difference in other people's lives. And I think you're definitely doing that. So do you remember a time when you bargained with God about Marianne and saying, God, this is what trying to talk me into letting her live? Do you remember that?
I'm not a bargainer with God. I mean, I know that's one of the 5 stages of grief, but bargaining, but no, I don't
Right. Well,
agree with
not
that.
everybody does that.
And
Right. Yeah.
not everybody does that. And I mean, I have a statement that's in this experience that I developed online, a statement that I created several years ago. And there's a picture of Marianne and I walking into our church, and I took a picture of the steeple of the church with the sun behind it. Matter of fact, I went through that experience this morning, and the statement is this. Now, this deals into spirituality with the grief process. I know no other way of how to endure grief without the spiritual component. That's just me. I'm not saying you have to do that, but that's just
That's your
me. It isn't just me. It's a lot of people, but that's the way I look at it. Anyway, to prove I'm not a bargainer, I'm a prayer person, but I'm not a bargainer. That's a good way to put it. And, and the statement is this: the true test of faith is believing in God's plan. In other words, I may have over the years, why is he taking her away from the world? Why? I didn't say, God, don't take her away. I just ask, why are you taking her away from the world? And I still don't have that answer.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I was reading something in a book that my Bible study group is doing right now about kind of the why, and it was about a dad who had lost a child tragically. Somebody had come in the house and killed the child, so the child was no longer there.
Ouch.
And the dad's and this guy asked him. He said, "How do you deal with losing your child?" And he said, "Well." And he had a tapestry on his wall, and he turned it around, and under the tapestry, of course, is all the threads, that you see. And he said, "This is the why. I don't know why," but he turned it around and he goes, "God knows why." It turns out to be a tapestry,
Right.
and it has to do with
Yeah.
trust. If you really trust in God,
That's what I mean by that statement. The true test of faith is believing in
yeah,
God's plan.
and
True test of faith is believing in
that's
God's
tough.
plan. To me, that says it up. That says it all. And that's hard to accept. But once you can accept that, then I think you can endure a lot of misery. And you learn to cope with the pain. That I finally got to that point. You learn to cope with the pain, and it's painful. I mean, this time of the day is kind of okay for me, but don't ask me how I feel at 7 o'clock at night, because 7 o'clock was kind of the magic hour for 50 years where I don't care what I was doing. If I was home, I was sitting by my wife watching television or something that she had recorded, and we were going to watch, and we were going to sit and talk about it. And now she's not there, and that really drives me nuts. And I wake up in the middle of the night wondering, I hope she was happy, and all that kind of stuff. And very frankly, I usually go to the gym in the middle of the night. I'll wake up 1 or 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, can't go back to sleep. What do? Do I grab a bottle? No, I go to the gym and wear myself out so I can go back home and go back to sleep again.
Yeah.
Do I drink? No, don't dare. I don't dare do any of that stuff. I just don't dare. I'm not going to get started on any of those habits to pull me down. Now, in answer to Sandy said, by helping other people, I'm going to rattle off a thing called personal mission I developed that's in my courses that I've developed. This is not a poem, it's just a quote. I will avoid any substance or situation that might interfere with my ability to share my gifts and talents with the most possible people in the best possible way. And so that's what I'm saying, is that I'm just, without getting into details, I'm just trying to help the world be a happier place. And some of you know what I'm talking about. And so that's all I'm working on. And I'm just, God's plan is to use me to help the world be a happier place. And that's what I'm trying to do.
I'm
Just
and
that
I'm thinking,
simple.
as you talk about the spiritual component, you have a settled knowledge of where Marianne is. And that
Definitely.
helps. And then I'm thinking that, if it were me, I'm watching people who are already in heaven watching me, and Marianne would be happy with what you're doing. She would approve of it.
Well, on my website, the way I put that is this: there's, after she passed away, I put a thing on the homepage of our website, right on the website. Both of you have probably seen this, that this methodology is dedicated to the loving memory of Marianne Brummond. And so she was behind what I'm doing so much. She was a college administrator. I mean, she really knew her stuff. She was a leader. She was everything. And she was behind what I'm doing so much that I'm doing it for her now.
Sounds like she was a very dynamic woman.
Yeah.
Bruce, how long had she been ill before she passed away?
She had cancer for nearly a year, and so we battled that. I mean, you thought I was going to say that she battled that. We battled that together. I was her advocate, and we were in Seattle almost daily, back and forth. She would spend her time in hospitals and in care facilities, different things, for almost a year. She was over cancer She went through all kinds of treatments. She went through all kinds of just horrible, horrible, horrible experiences with chemo and the treatments. And she died of pneumonia.
Wow.
And one of the stages of grief is anger, according to some people. And I will never ever get over me trying to tell the medical professionals there's something wrong with this woman besides the chemo treatments, and they wouldn't listen to me. I should have taken her to a regular doctor and had her diagnosed because she had pneumonia for a
Wow.
long time. Pneumonia is hard. It's hard to diagnose compared to
Sure.
chemo, but that's what actually killed her. And so, yeah, that was just awful.
One of the things that
I
we've
mean,
talked about, Bruce, is the fact that fear turns into anger. So your fear for your wife knowing something's not right and you're not getting somebody to listen to you absolutely would turn into anger. But did you find that you were doing the grieving process during that year before she passed away?
well, that opens up a whole nother subject. I, I'm just about to send a message to a lady who goes to my church who has a husband who has Alzheimer's, and I have been telling her we need to have a long talk because you're in the grief process. And I learned about that side of the grief process when I was teaching my courses in person, which I used to do. I don't do that anymore, but when I used to do, I was teaching in an adult care facility, and we got into the grief process at that point, and I had done a lot of work establishing how we look at grief, and they said to me, "Well, just a minute here. How about we know somebody's going to die? What is? How do you look at that?" I said, "I'll work on that and see you next time." So I'm going to take the word grief and define it with the letters of the word. When somebody dies, somebody has died. Grief, granting respect inspires everyone forever.
Can you say that again? Can you
Boom.
say that?
Granting respect inspires everyone forever. In other words, what would that person want me to do? And I told the workers at this facility that, and they said, "That's great, but how about we know somebody's going to die? How do you look at that for grief?" So I said, "I'll see you next time with a different acronym." So I developed this acronym: gradually releasing intimate emotions faithfully. In other words, Marianne and I talked about her dying. What's the possibility of her dying? And I'll never. I remember where we were when we had this discussion, and I said, "I'm working on the word mortal, and I'm unhappy with the last two words of the acronym for the word mortal." And so she came up with the last two words, mortal. This is on her plaque. Mankind only resides temporarily, except leaving.
Except leaving,
Boom.
yeah.
Yeah, we have to accept that when God says it's time to go, it's time to go, and we can do what we want to try to stop that, but or try to slow that down. But that's it. So now back to this: if we know somebody's going to die, which most times we know in advance, somebody's terminally ill and we know they're going to die. The example that I use is this: if you're going to hit, if you know you're going to hit your thumb with a hammer, is it going to hurt less if you know that's coming? It still really, really, really hurts. I don't care if you know it's coming or not, and you just have a long time to get your affairs in order and to start working on what's going to happen if this person's not here. But it still really hurts. That's all
And
there is
it's
to it.
almost a
More
flip
questions?
side of the grief process is the person who's dying. They go through grief
Right.
process too,
Right.
even though they're leaving it for you. And again, as being a Christian, a person of faith, God, trusting that God's will is God's will, and we're not going to know, at least on this earth, what the why is all about. It just is. Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I asked you about the grieving process is that I had an uncle whose wife had breast cancer, and they were dealing with that for 11 years. After she passed away, he got married within a year, and I know people were shocked that he got married so fast, but the process of grieving had been happening all those 11 years. So the ultimate grief, yes, did happen when Aunt Ellen finally passed away, but he had been having to deal with the reality of that whole thing for 11 years and the grieving that they had done together as well as him doing separately.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the bottom line is nobody else can tell you what you need to do when it comes to the grief process. You just block out what they say. I mean, somebody says to me, "Oh, you should find somebody else." No, that's your
Right.
opinion. If somebody else walks into my life and if I feel I can help them be happy, they can help me be happy, it might be a different story. That hasn't happened yet, and it may not. It
Yeah.
probably won't. But there's always people who want to tell us how to live. No, no. It's up to us individually. It isn't just with the grief process, it's everything. And so we can listen to people, but they aren't they aren't our master. And so it's just that simple. It in the experience that but I think both of you watch this online. I talk about I bumped into a fellow in church shortly after Mary Ann died, and I told them that I was a widower, and he said, "I am too." I said, "How are you dealing with that?" And he looked at this woman that he was with and he smiled and he said, "My wife died 6 years ago, but now I have a relationship with this woman and I am so happy now." I said,
Right.
"Good for you." There's not a time. I mean,
Right thing for
no
him.
way in the world there isn't a timeline of anything. Why do I have two dogs? Distractions.
Mhm.
I have reason to come home. I have two dogs in my house. Marianne, this is almost funny, but almost not funny. We had a Bichon Frise for 17 years. He went away 4 years ago. He died 4 years ago. And and I said, "I want another dog." She said, "Now while I'm in this house," I'm going, "I guess I'll live in the garage then." And so then when she got sick, she said, "If you want to get a dog," now they're expensive. She said, "If you want to get a dog, pull the money out of this account." And she told me where to pull the money from. I said, "Oh, okay, fine." So I went to Spokane and found a dog. I mean, I found him online, went to Spokane and picked him up. And that was the first one. So then I brought him home and he was around her a little bit, and she agreed that in case I lost her, that at least that dog would give me some comfort. And so shortly after she died, the dog was diagnosed with a potential fatal disease. And
Oh,
I'm going, "Oh no. I can't take this," and I'd fallen in love with that puppy, and so I got a second one just in case. So now I have two.
You got dog insurance.
Yeah, dog insurance. Yeah, very expensive dog insurance.
Yeah, well,
but
that's
but
good.
anyway, I think pets are really important as
Yeah,
a distraction.
and they
And
are good distractions. So,
yeah, not for everybody, but for me. And you can see the tail of the one behind me here. that that that's the our previous dog. This is really funny. The first Bichon we had, I asked Marianne. I said, "What are we going to name this dog?" She said, "Well, since you're a professor and my name is Marianne, let's name him Skipper." I go,
oh,
"Perfect." So then when I got this puppy while she was still alive, I had to have a name because she didn't want a dog in the house. I had to have a name because she wanted to throw up thinking about having a dog in the house. So I had to have a name for that. Then I had to have a name so to stay in the Gilligan's Island theme. Well, his name is, this is really funny. His name is Captain Ralph. So then when I got Captain Ralph and Marianne was still alive, he just loved being around her, but she didn't want anything to do with him, which I understand, you know.
Yeah, she wasn't
So
feeling.
then, so then the second one, what am I going to name him? Well, I'm out of Gilligan's Island names, but at least I'll say nautical. And what's his job? His job is to keep Captain Ralph and me afloat. So his name is, now this is really funny. His name is Admiral Life Jacket.
Oh, that's cute. You
Yeah.
need
I
to
just
go
call
into
him
the
Ralph and
dog
Jacket.
naming business. You need to go into the dog naming business. You'd be great.
I just call him Ralph and Jacket. I can't tell them apart.
Oh, that's
And,
great.
and
Animals are
Ralph just
great
showed up here.
they take up your time and they distract you with all their little antics. So you you tell a great you're doing a great job of talking about your journey. And talk to me, and this, the reason we're doing these podcasts is we know that there's people out there that need to hear stories about how people are surviving, and what's something that so you're making an impact by doing that. But did it help you to listen to other people? I mean, it sounds like you went to listen to help people, but did you get any cathartic help from listening to other people's stories?
That's a really good question. And what I realized in these 19 different group sessions that I attended, people were when they carried the stress of another issue into the grief process, that compounded the grief process. And I heard so many people complain about things they had no control over to begin with. And that's the issue. That's what really creates stress in our lives, is is worrying about things we have no control over.
Right, right. That's
And
true.
so we have to delineate what we have control over, what we have no control over, and we have to accept the things that we have no control over. And
Right.
that's the tough
That's
part
hard.
for a lot of people.
Well, and so part of that reasoning, I would think, I'm not a psychologist, but you're healing some of your other life issues as you're going through the grief process. And some people haven't come to some of those self-awareness pieces that they need to. So it's a growing process. But the other thing that you've survived and are surviving is loneliness. And we say grief and loss, but there's a huge hole in your life, being lonely, and that's tough.
We like the acronym for lonely. Love only need to escape, life yearns. That's lonely.
Yeah.
And that's it. When we're deeply in love, and then that's over. You're right on target. And I discuss that and get into that in a lot of respects in my materials. And the way I attempt to overcome that is I tell women in my life, I love having sisters, I love having daughters, and I really love having adopted granddaughters. And so I have a lot of friends. And what I do is, for openers, just talking to you two today is a distraction for me, and it counts. I try to spend at least an hour a day talking to somebody about something.
Good.
Right.
I don't care what it is, but I have a whole list of friends that we call one another and just talk. Some are widows and widowers and different people. And we just, well, what have you been doing? What's going on in your life? How do you feel?
Mhm.
What are you upset about? Those kinds of things. And as a matter of fact, my next doctorate degree will probably be in therapy. And isn't that
That's
funny?
good. No,
Because
that makes
I,
sense.
I find myself, I have I have turned into the therapist for the therapist,
Mhm.
and because I've developed all this material that deals with that, and so, but I enjoy that. But who's getting the therapy out of it? You're right, Sue. It's me. Yeah,
Right.
Well, and it's so powerful because we as humans, we need other people,
Right.
we're
and
social animals.
yeah, and when you're reaching out, you're proactively talking to people, because a lot of people just sit at home in their chair and mope, and don't get distracted, and you're proactively doing something every day. I have to tell you something funny. When you watch this podcast, it looks like you have white hair. Your dog's
Especially on one side of my head,
tail is
and
down. You have a little
that's Admiral
ponytail
Life
back there.
Jacket's tail.
Yeah, a new hairdo.
That's a $2,000 tail. Just to
Well,
let you
I hope
know.
you take good care of it.
And
Yeah,
he's the cheap one. The other one costs more than that.
that's good. That's good. So, Bruce, what we're going to kind of wrap it up here, and my question always is, what's one takeaway from our conversation today? So what would be a takeaway from, we have talked a lot about a lot of things, but what's one takeaway you got?
If life was perfect here on earth, there wouldn't be a need for a heaven.
Ah, nice.
That quote is in my online experience. If
Okay,
life was perfect here on earth, there wouldn't be a need for a heaven.
there you
And
go.
in reality, what we have to do is just stay busy. And I call it distractions. Whatever
Yeah.
will distract us from having our mind go down the rat hole.
Mhm.
Now, I'll leave you with this. I'll sum it up this way. If you walk up to a rose garden, what do you look at?
The roses.
You look at the blossoms on the roses. You look at the thorns, or do you search for a rat hole in the ground? Where do you look? What do you think of?
Yeah.
And that's what we have to do in our lives. We have to look for the blossoms. We have to look for the good things. We have to look for the positive things. And it's up to us to control our thoughts to think about those things. It's just that
Well,
simple.
you're not only going to be a therapist, but you're a neuroscientist, because that's what
That's
all the brain research now talks about, is how do I train my brain to focus on the joy and the right things. Sandy, what are you taking away?
that there is do-overs in life, that when you're faced with a tragedy or a huge loss, you can turn a corner, just like Bruce has. He's turned a corner, and he hasn't just survived, he has thrived because of his mindset and where he's going to go. He's gone through the process, and he probably keeps going through the process of grieving at different points in time, like you were saying, the music that your wife loved, or the name of the college that she went to, or all those kinds of things. And I think it's important for people to realize that that is part of it, is that you will cycle around, but that you can start a new chapter for your life, and not just survive, but you can thrive.
Yeah, and my takeaway is,
Thank you. No, that's
my
it.
takeaway is, you are a great role model, because you choose your focus every day. You choose to be distracted on something that's going to keep you healthy and positive, and keep going and writing forever. My gosh, you're going to have so many books on your list. So thank you so much. I'm going to give you the opportunity to close here, Bruce. You got a final word for us?
I'll close with the
Okay.
word focus. Well, then the
Okay.
word death. Focus. Forget other crud, understand stuff. You use the word focus. Forget other crud, understand stuff. In other words, what should we bypass in our thoughts, and what should we be thinking of? Then the word death sums it up. We're talking about
Yes.
death, aren't we? I'm going to spell death with the letters of the word, define it with the letters of the word. Departed everyday activities, touring heaven.
Oh, I like that.
So I want to tell the audience,
Yeah.
I'm going to, underneath this podcast, I'm going to put down your website so that they can get hold of you.
Thank you.
And he has great resources, and he's very generous with them. So please connect with Bruce.
Well, thank you. And I'll add to that on that website, that free course, it's free. There's no advertisers, no anything. It's called Coping with Heartache. Just hit the online course button, scroll down and find Coping with Heartache, and then It's a little over an hour long. It's really not a course. I call it an
It is. It's
experience,
very
but
good. Thank you.
it
Yeah,
it helps. It helps. Thank
do
you
we
so
have a
much,
clean
ladies.
doctor now?
Yes. No, you know, I'm still just a fat old man from Port Orchard
Thank you so much.
who has
Thank you
two
so much for
puppies.
joining us again, Bruce.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording, but
Thank
Bruce,
you.
hang on just for
Thank
a
you.
second.
Bye bye.